Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Interdisciplinary and Trans-Disciplinary Studies, SOITS, Bachelor's Degree Programs, BA, Philosophy, First Year, BPY-001 Indian Philosophy, Part 1, Block-1 Introduction to Indian Philosophy, Unit 1 General Characteristics of Indian Philosophy. 1.0 Objectives. The main objectives of this unit are to dispel certain misconceptions about Indian philosophy held mainly by Western scholars and certain other misconceptions held by some Indian scholars. In order to grasp Indian philosophy in proper perspective, it is necessary that these misconceptions are erased. To distinguish philosophy from religion in the Indian context. This unit shows that, taken in the strict sense of the term, philosophy is not the same as religion. Some key philosophical issues developed in Indian context on very different lines when compared with Western thought. To project the essence of Indian thought. 1.1 Introduction. In Indian context, philosophy is taken to mean darshana or tattva. We shall consider how the etymological meaning of philosophy correlates itself with darshana or tattva. Drishyatanena iti darshanam, the one through which it is seen. The word seen can be understood either literally or philosophically. Though the difference is irrelevant, let us consider only the latter. To see, in philosophic sense means to realize. Darsana, therefore, means to realize. Again, the verb realize is a transitive verb. We always realize something whenever we realize. To say that we realize nothing is to admit that there is no realization at all. If we recollect whatever that was said about know, then it becomes clear that to a great extent, to realize corresponds to know, and hence realization corresponds to knowledge. This correspondence is nearly one-to-one, i.e., it is nearly isomorphic. This aspect unfolds itself in due course. Before proceeding in this direction, we should know what tattva stands for. The word tattva is derived from two words, tat and tva. Tat means it or that and tva means you. Therefore tattva, etymologically, means you are that. What is important is to know what tat stands for in Indian thought. It means reality or ultimate reality. This is also what one division of philosophy, i.e., metaphysics, talks about. The word it, which appears in the meaning of darshana, stands for tat, i.e., ultimate reality. Since darshana is knowing reality, it involves not only an important metaphysical component but also an important epistemological component. Hence, the summation of these two components more or less satisfactorily completes the description of philosophy as darshana in Indian context. There is yet another component that remains to be understood. Obviously, TVA stands for knower, i.e., the epistemological subject, and by identifying the epistemological subject with reality, we arrive at an important corollary. Indian thought did not distinguish between reality and the person or epistemological subject, and hence etymologically, knowledge in Indian thought became inward. However, it must be emphasized that it outgrew the etymological meaning in its nascent stage itself. But what is of critical importance is the philosophical significance of the above-mentioned corollary. Wherever man is involved, directly or indirectly, value is involved. So axiology surfaces. When man is identified with reality, it and the whole lot of issues related to reality gain value overtones. Hence, in Indian context, value is not merely a subject matter of philosophy, but philosophy itself comes to be regarded as value. Consequently, the very approach of Indian thinkers to philosophy gains some distinct features. 1.2 Philosophers look at reality. Indian thought is essentially pluralistic as regards arguments which give an exposition of reality. First, we can begin with types of reality, and this can be done from two different angles. Look at the screen for Table 1 and 2. Let us try to understand what Table 1 says. But before doing so, it is better to answer the question, what is reality? Indeed, this is the most difficult question to answer. To start with reality, can be defined as the one which is the ultimate source of everything and itself does not have any source. It also can be taken to mean that which is independent. This definition itself is hotly debated in philosophical circles. If we take this as a working definition of reality, then we find to our surprise that ancient Indians offered various answers resulting in the proliferation of an ocean of theories, to use the phrase used by Feyerabend. Contrary to widespread belief prevailed in the past, all Indian thinkers did not recognize reality as spiritual. Nor did they unanimously regard it as secular. A complex discipline like philosophy does not allow such simple division. Surely, some thinkers accepted only spiritual reality and on the contrary, some other thinkers accepted only secular reality. However, in many cases, these two divisions crossed and the result is that in those cases we discover that reality has two faces, secular and spiritual. An upshot of this conclusion is that thinkers in India neglected neither this world nor the other, if it exists. This is a significant aspect to be borne in mind. Curiously, at level 2, the divisions of secular and spiritual theories are mutually exclusive and totally exhaustive, i.e., physical and non-physical, on the one hand and theistic and non-theistic, on the other. Though within secular range, and similarly within spiritual range, the divisions exclude each other. Any division of secular theory can go with any division of spiritual theory without succumbing to self-contradiction. Accordingly, we arrive at four combinations which are as follows. 1. Physical, theistic. 2. Physical, non-theistic. 3. Non-physical, theistic. 4. Non-physical, non-theistic. Now let us get to know the meaning of these terms. A theory which regards the independence of physical world is physical. Likewise, a theory which regards the independence of any other substance than physical world is non-physical. The former need not be non-theistic. A theory of reality can accord equal status to this world and God. Surely, it does not involve any self-contradiction. The Dvatar and the Vaisesika illustrate the former, whereas Charvaka illustrates the latter. A diagram illustrates the point. Physical. A. Theistic. C. Non-physical. B. Non-theistic. D. Look at the screen. What is to be noted here is that A and B lack connectivity, and so also C and D. In Western tradition, the term mind replaces the term non-physical. However, in Indian context such usage is inaccurate because, at least, some schools regard mind as sixth organ. The Samkhya is one school which regards mind as an evolute of Prakriti. Hence, it is as much physical as any other sense organ. The Visheshika is another school which has to be bracketed with the Samkhya in this regard. At this stage, we should get ourselves introduced to two key metaphysical terms. Realism and idealism. The former with all its variants regards the external world as ultimately real, whereas the latter with all its variants regards external world as a derivative of mind. Of course, here mind is not to be construed as sixth organ. The Yogacara, a later Buddhistic school, is one system which subscribes to idealism. Now it is clear that A and B are mutually exclusive and totally exhaustive. Under D, there are two subdivisions, atheistic and agnostic. C, on the one hand, and atheistic and agnostic on the other hand are mutually exclusive and totally exhaustive. Since atheistic and agnostic doctrines are philosophically different, second and fourth types are further split into two each. So, instead of 4, we will have 6 theories. Each theory differs from every other theory. The differences are sometimes gross and sometimes subtle. It is, now, more than obvious that Indian philosophy does not lend itself to simple and easy categorization. Complexity and variety must be regarded as salient features of Indian thought. This aspect is further compounded when Table 1 and Table 2 intersect. Before considering such intersection, we should first elucidate Table 2. Table 2 explicates theories of reality and distinguishes theories on the basis of number, i.e., the number of substances, which are regarded as real, becomes the criterion to make any distinction. Monism asserts that reality is one. The assertions of dualistic and pluralistic theories can be ascertained without difficulty, since they stand for two and more than two, respectively. Non-dualistic theory, i.e., the Advaita is unique. It does not make any assertion about number, but only negates dualism. If dualism is inadmissible, then pluralism is also inadmissible. The Upanishads are monistic and the Vaisesika is pluralistic. Now we shall integrate Table 1 and Table 2. An integration of this sort yields in all 24 systems. This is not to imply that 24 systems dominated the scene. But majority of them did flourish at one time or the other. Consideration of questions in respect of reality should make it clear that no qualitative difference can be discerned between the Indian and the Western traditions. Questions are alike, because problems are alike. But the same set of questions may elicit different answers from different minds at different times and places. Always, spatio-temporal factor plays a major role in determining solutions. The last aspect becomes clear after we consider issues in respect of knowledge. 1.3 Knowledge in Indian context. Desire to know is not an extraordinary quality of man. This is an instinct which can be discerned in any animal. However, differences lie elsewhere. The extent of knowledge acquired or capable of being acquired varies from species to species. This is one difference. Second, man's motive to acquire knowledge and his concept of knowledge differ from culture to culture. Previous statement, surely, does not imply ranking of culture. It only shows that the concept of knowledge is relative to culture. The essence of philosophy consists in these two principal factors, motive and idea. Indian and Western concepts, whether ancient or modern, are best understood when they are compared and contrasted. Ancient Greeks believed in the principle, knowledge for the sake of knowledge, which gave impetus to birth and growth of pure science. In contrast, post-Renaissance age heralded the contrary principle, knowledge is power. This dictum propagated by Bacon changed forever the very direction of the evolution of science. However, ancient Indians exhibited a very different mindset. While medicine and surgery developed to meet practical needs, astronomy and mathematics developed for unique reason, neither purely spiritual nor purely mundane, in order to perform yagas to meet practical ends and yajnas to achieve spiritual gain. At any rate, ancient Indians never believed in Greek dictum. Nor did they, perhaps, think of it. If we regard knowledge as value, then we have to conclude that it was never regarded as intrinsic. On the other hand, it was mainly instrumental. The only exception to this characterization is the Charvaka system, which can be regarded as the Indian counterpart of Epicureanism. In a restricted sense, the Indian philosophy of knowledge comes very close to the Baconan philosophy of knowledge. Truly, Indians regarded knowledge as power because for them knowledge, and thereby, philosophy, was a way of life, and this is the reason why for them knowledge was never intrinsic. But, then, it is absolutely necessary to reverse the connotation of the word, power. While the Baconan, power, was meant to experience control over nature, the Indian, power, was supposed to be the instrument to subjugate one's own self to nature. This is the prime principle which forms the cornerstone of early Vedic thought. This radical change in the meaning of the word, power, also explains the difference in worldview which can be easily discerned when the belief systems and attitudes of Indians and Europeans, for our purpose, West, means Europe only, are compared and contrasted. Post-Baconian Europe believed that this universe and everything in it is meant to serve the purpose of man because man is the center of the universe. The spark of this thought did characterize a certain phase in the development of Vedic thought, only to be denounced at later stage. On the other hand, ancient Indian believed in identifying himself with nature. We should carry further our analysis of Baconian power, vis-a-vis the Indian power. The repetition of what was said earlier is only to reinforce the critical importance of consequences. Knowledge was not only power, but became a powerful weapon for the Westerners to address their economic and political agenda. At no point of time did Westerners look upon knowledge as a means to achieve anything even remotely connected to spiritual goal. Just as the Charvaka is an exception in Indian context, Socrates and Spinoza can be regarded as exceptions in Western context. Indians, however, did not regard worldly pleasure as ultimate. For them there was something more important and enduring, and therefore the conquest of nature never mattered. Precisely, this attitude has generated lot of needless controversy. This characterization, which, no doubt, is true, was grossly misunderstood and, consequently, it was argued that the Indian thought rejects altogether this world and present life as totally irrelevant and insignificant. This argument, which stems from total misunderstanding, is altogether unwarranted. To say that X is more important than Y is not to say that Y is insignificant. If something is more important, then it means that something else is less important. In other words, Indian tradition, surely, includes the present life, but it is not restricted to it, goes beyond it. This point becomes clear in the third chapter. Evidently, Indian tradition maintains a certain hierarchy of values unlike Western tradition. Knowledge, as a way of life, encompasses not only all sorts of values but also it changes one's own perspective. Accordingly, the so-called spiritual goal in life can be attained only by one who has acquired knowledge. It points to the fact that ignorance or avidya is a hindrance to attain spiritual goal in particular and any other goal in general. One who has acquired true knowledge, or knows truly, acts and thinks very differently, different from ignorant, a characteristic Socratic thought in Indian attire. However, this characteristic is conspicuous by its absence in Western tradition. It was not necessary that personal life of a philosopher should match his philosophy, in the sense that a philosopher's life need not be a role model for lesser mortals to emulate. While Socrates and Spinoza are at one end of the thread, Bacon and Heidegger are at the opposite end. The point is that in Indian tradition, philosophy and value are inseparable, whereas in the West it is not so. A philosopher, in the West, can be, not that they are, worse than a hardened criminal. But in Indian context it is inconceivable. This sort of emphasis upon values led to a hermeneutic blunder. Without batting his eyelid, the critic, just like protagonist, argued that in Indian philosophy was never distinct from religion. Hence in India there was no philosophy at all worth the name according to critics. That there was no religion in India, with the exclusion of tribal religion, is a different story. The so-called Hindu dharma cannot be mistaken and ought not to be mistaken for religion. This confusion arose because many scholars mistakenly identified religion with spirituality. An analogy may clear the mist surrounding Indian philosophy. Western philosophy is not divided into Christian philosophy and Jewish philosophy, though all Western philosophers, excluding Greek philosophers, in loose sense are either Christians or Jews. Likewise, it is highly inappropriate to talk about Hindu philosophy, though majority of Indian philosophers were committed Hindus. It is true that a few philosophers in India became the heads of religious groups or sects, e.g. Ramanuj or Madhva. But then we have Street Augustine, Street Aquinas, etc. in the West also. But nobody characterizes their philosophy as Christian philosophy. But surely, we have Buddhist or Jaina philosophy because neither Buddhism nor Jainism is a religion in the strict sense of the term. At this point, a pertinent question arises: if there is Buddhist philosophy, then why not Hindu philosophy? To believe that there is such philosophy amounts to putting the cart in front of the horse. Philosophy in India did not originate from Sanatana Dharma, or Hindu Dharma as it is popularly known as, but it is the other way round. Therefore, in sharp contrast to Western tradition, Indian philosophy is essentially spiritual. When it was said earlier that in India also knowledge is regarded as power, what was meant was that knowledge was regarded as spiritual power, spiritual which is totally non-religious in its nature. It is an error to assume that spiritual overtones can be discerned only in knowledge. The concept of reality and aesthetic values also are endowed with spirituality. The Upanishadic or Advaitic notion of Brahman is a classic example. It is spiritual because it is neither worldly, physical, nor religious. If knowledge is spiritual, then its Brahma, object, also must be spiritual. Raso Visaha, that is, indeed, Rasa, is an example for spiritual status of aesthetic value. In this case, that, according to, at least one interpretation means, Para Brahma, or highest reality, and Rasa may be taken to mean beauty. The metaphysical or spiritual element involved in philosophy must have been hijacked by religions to formulate their notions of gods, and perhaps to counter their rivals. Let us return to knowledge again. Indian philosophy recognizes knowledge at two levels: Para-vidya, higher knowledge, and Apara-vidya, lower knowledge. Since knowledge is spiritual, only the former is true knowledge, whereas the latter is not knowledge at all in the strict sense of the term. Though the Upanishads subscribe to this view, subsequent systems, with the exception of Purva Mimamsa, which are supposed to be commentaries on the Upanishads, regarded perception, for example, as a way of knowledge. Upamana is another pramana. Not only lower knowledge, but also erroneous knowledge was seriously considered as species of knowledge, e.g., akhyati, by systems of philosophy. Therefore even Apara Vidya retained its place. Does Indian philosophy integrate spiritual life with worldly affairs? If the claim, that upholding of the former is not tantamount to the rejection of the latter, then it does not. The truth is that the former does not entail the latter. Therefore these two had to be fused, and it was achieved in a remarkable manner. Purushartha scheme clarifies that only through dharma, i.e., righteous means, man should acquire artha, wealth, and satisfy kama, any sensuous desire, the very same means to attain moksha, liberation. The law of parsimony is very well adhered to as regards the questions of social philosophy and moral philosophy. 1.4 Philosophy and Life. Earlier, it was said that in India philosophy itself was regarded as a value, and also that value and human life are inextricably blended. What is the aim of life? Against this backdrop, it is easy to discover solution to this quest in Indian philosophy. It is not so easy to reach the same in Western tradition. It is true that existentialism attempted the same, but it remained a sort of island and was obliterated by analytic tradition. The aim of life according to Indian tradition is to make a pilgrimage from misery to happiness. This is a single thread which runs through the whole gamut of Indian philosophy. At one point of time, vertical split occurred in philosophical tradition, leading to the birth of orthodox and heterodox schools of thought. However, they concur on one issue, i.e., the aim of life. It is a commonplace practice to regard them as Vedic and non-Vedic schools, though it is not very satisfactory to regard so. The dispute between these two poles did not prevent them from embracing a common goal. In what sense is this goal a philosophical issue? This is one question which arises in this context. How can two opposing schools of thought have a common denominator? This is another. Answer to the first question can be construed as follows. Knowledge as value is unique by itself. If the instrument which gives thrust to the quality of lifestyle has any economic value, then from a different perspective, if any, knowledge which reforms lifestyle also must possess value. Therefore knowledge became the value in Indian thought. A Janani in Socratic sense perceives not only routine life, but also the world in which he lives, differently because knowledge changes his worldview. This type of change carries with it moral value. It means that the aim of life becomes an ethical issue. In this sense it becomes a philosophical issue. Answer to second question is still simpler. All schools of philosophy unanimously admit that the pursuit of happiness is the sole aim, and unanimity stops there. But these two poles differ when they specify what happiness is. An example may make the point clear. All political parties, in their election manifesto, proclaim that their sole aim is uplifting the downtrodden. But the mechanism of doing so differs from one party to the other. Now the position is clear. Orthodox and heterodox schools differ on what happiness is and on what constitutes happiness. Even within heterodox system the idea of happiness differs. The Charvaka school maintains that happiness consists in pleasure, whereas the Buddhism asserts that happiness consists in nirvana if happiness is to be construed as elimination of misery. Earlier, it was mentioned that spirituality is the essence of Indian philosophy. Against this background, let us analyze what happiness is. Neither this physical world nor earthly pleasure is permanent, nor are they ultimate. Hopefully, no one entertains the illusion that this world is eternal. However, not many care to think whether or not everlasting peace or happiness is possible within the bounds of finite world. Indian philosophy is characterized by this thought. The desire to attain eternity is common to the Greek and the Indian traditions. However, in the latter case this desire takes a different form. Hence eternity is tantamount to permanent liberation from misery. A permanent liberation from misery is tantamount to attainment of permanent happiness, and this at eternity. It is variously designated as moksha, nirvana, etc. In its ordinary sense vairagya means renouncing happiness. But in real sense what has to be renounced is not happiness, but pleasure. Vairagya in conjunction with knowledge leads to eternal happiness. Hence in Indian context vairagya is, renounce worldly pleasure and attain eternal happiness. It is possible that the very idea of renunciation invites strong objections. But in one definite sense such a renunciation is desirable. Vairagya should be construed as elimination of greed and inclusion of contentment in life. This is the hidden meaning of vairagya. What happened, in course of time, was that both dimensions were wrongly interpreted, leading to the conclusion that vairagya is not only negative but also is the sign of pessimism. It did not stop at this stage, but extended to the whole of Indian philosophy. At this point, it is necessary to digress. In the 20th century, Westerners believed that in India there was nothing like philosophy, but only myth and casuistry in the garb of philosophy. While the Western scholars argued that in India, philosophy was totally corrupted by religion, some Indian scholars under the influence of Marxism failed to separate philosophy from custom and tradition afflicting Indian society. The merits and demerits of their arguments and counter-arguments are not relevant presently. But the sense in which the word religion has to be construed, if it has to be regarded as philosophically constructive, is important. If the word religion is taken to mean tribal religion, then its association with philosophy spells doom to the latter. In India, philosophy was not influenced by religion in this sense. On the other hand, various religious sects, which grew later, were influenced by philosophy. But the criticisms of those scholars, who admit that in ancient India there was philosophic movement, merit our considerations. According to one criticism, Indian thought prompted negative outlook and therefore, is self-destructive only because it negates the reality of physical world. This criticism can be rebutted in two stages. In the first place, Indian philosophy does not deny the physical world in absolute terms. A particular system of philosophy does not become a negative doctrine just because it regards the world as impermanent and that what is impermanent is regarded as not ultimately real. No scientist has ever dared to say that the universe is eternal. If the critic's argument is admitted, then Plato's philosophy also becomes negative in character. Indian philosophers, like Plato, admitted something permanent. Impermanence and permanence are relative terms. Relevance of any one of them demands the relevance of another. Secondly, what is relative is always relative to something different. There is nothing like absolute relativity. The last two statements which, actually, explicate the essence of the theory of relativity holds good here also. Now let us consider the second stage of refutation. Is it legitimate to categorize any doctrine as negative? Refutation is an important step in arguments. But it is not final. If science can be characterized as satisfying a negative requirement such as falsifiability, Karl Popper, 1959, p.41, then philosophy, whether Indian or Western, also is entitled to the same benefit or status. To a great extent Indian philosophy followed the principle of assertion through refutation. Precisely this principle was upheld by Popper. Second criticism is as follows. It is pessimistic. Any theory, which negates this world and life in absolute sense, ought to be pessimistic. The very fact that this criticism draws support from two sources of error shows the degree of misunderstanding. First, the desire to escape from misery was misconstrued as the desire to escape from external world. Second, it discourages earthly pleasure. Let us consider the second source first. Negation of earthly pleasure is not tantamount to the negation of happiness because pleasure and happiness are, evidently, different. Moksha is simply Sanskrit version of happiness. Pleasure is not only momentary but also is not pure in the sense that pleasure always comes with pain. If we consider Bentham's criteria, then these criteria satisfy not pleasure but happiness. Duration, intensity and purity do not, in reality, characterize pleasure but happiness. Perhaps proximity alone satisfies pleasure. If so, even from practical standpoint, any philosophy which regards moksha as ideal ceases to be pessimistic. Now let us turn to the first source. Desire to escape from this world describes the mindset of an escapist. There are references to rebirth. Rebirth may only be a myth and something beyond verification. But when attainment of moksha is regarded as a possibility during the lifespan of an individual, this is what is called Jivan Mukti. There is no reason to regard the external world as an evil. It is, however, true that not only critics, but also the votaries of Indian philosophy misunderstood the concept of moksha, and it led to the cardinal mistake of treating external world as evil. One more objection can be raised to moksha. Is moksha a meaningful ideal? In the first place, moksha must be possible, and secondly, its realization must be humanly possible. In the absence of either of them, does it not cease to be meaningful? Let us assume that it is humanly possible to attain moksha. Then it remains an ideal. But then nothing is lost. If we pursue an unattainable ideal, then we progress towards that ideal. What matters is progress. Plato's utopia is an example which comes very close to the ideal of moksha in this respect. Progress in right direction is true progress. Therefore, knowing fully well that it is humanly impossible to achieve a goal like moksha, man pursues moksha. Thereby man progresses from lower level to higher level. This is a singular advantage of accepting something like moksha as an ideal. In the Western tradition, only Greeks believed in the immortality of soul. It became totally alien to modern Western philosophy, though it found favor with Christianity. The paradox is that immortality of soul is a common theme to Christianity and Indian philosophy, whereas it ought to have been a common to Western philosophy and Christianity because West happens to be the mainland of Christianity. It illustrates one crucial factor. Religion does not determine philosophy. On the other hand, philosophy has the required potential at least to influence religion, if not determine the same. 1.5. Let us sum up. Philosophy is derived from two Greek words which mean love of knowledge or wisdom. In Indian tradition, philosophy means darshana or tattva. Indian outlook is essentially different from Western outlook. In terms of problems, there is no difference between Indian and Western philosophical traditions. Indians perceived knowledge as power in a different perspective. Bacon regarded knowledge as the means to establish authority over external world. On the other hand, Indians regarded knowledge as essential to establish control over one's own self. Indians recognized philosophy itself as a value. Therefore, philosophy, in India, was accepted as a way of life. With the sole exception of the Charvaka, all other systems of philosophy in India accepted liberation in one or the other sense. Moksha is one such ideal. Philosophy is independent of religion. However, religion may or may not be independent of philosophy. 1.6 Keywords. Yagas and yajnas. Yagas and yajnas are sacred rituals done to appease God, performed during the Vedic period. Pessimism. Pessimism, from the Latin, pessimus, worst, is a painful state of mind which negatively colors the perception of life, especially with regard to future events. Value judgments may vary dramatically between individuals, even when judgments of fact are undisputed. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.